Welcome, everyone. This is Keisha. It is Monday, July 15th, and we have a very important discussion for you tonight that's going to be led by Barbara Boyd, Bruce Director, and Bob Robert Ingram. So I want to let Barbara start off, and we will have the three speakers to respond to the developments of this past weekend. So let her go, and I'll have a couple of things to share in terms of videos that she might want to play a little bit later on. Barbara, let me make sure we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're in the middle of a huge historical transition. J.D. Vance, the man most of us wanted to be Trump's vice presidential pick, is the vice presidential pick. So we have Trump Vance, confidence and genius versus giggles and worse. That's what I think the headline is. Judge Eileen Cannon tossed the classified documents case today against Trump. She largely adopted Clarence Thomas's reasoning that the Jack Smith appointment is unconstitutional. That's a motion which has been made before, but Clarence Thomas's decision in the immunity case, I think, sealed the deal. So Jack Smith is really less than zero in terms of his ability to shepherd these cases through the court system. He's been rejected by the higher courts and only has the rabid Jacobins in DC still on his side. Finally, we're going to talk about the event which actually changed the world, the entire world, on Saturday. And that's really the overarching discussion we're going to have tonight. Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt through a miracle, which involved the direct intercession of God, we believe, a miracle witnessed by the entire world. And as such, it is changing people across the world. I'm going to be talking first and talking primarily about this assassination attempt and its impact. Bob Ingram is going to provide historical context for us. Bruce Director is talking about the world beyond our sense perceptions, which is at work here most profoundly, and I think Bob's going to talk about this also, in the impact of Melania Trump's letter to the American people about the tragedy which was averted last Saturday. Then we'll open it up for discussion because the events of Saturday night have provoked a most profound emotional reaction in most of us, and we assume you out there are also experiencing the same thing. I'm going to repeat some things I said on the Monday brief this morning. So if you listen to that, I'll give you a second dose of Barbara Boyd and update my perceptions there based on further discussions I've had with my colleagues over the course of today and this afternoon. What we know so far is that the Secret Service utterly failed to protect Donald Trump and facilitated the ability of an untrained assassin to kill Donald Trump. It was not clever or professional. He walked across an open field with a long gun and in khakis. He climbed a ladder to the only possible building in the area from which to take the right shot, and he used a ladder which somehow made its way there. The Secret Service saw him and did not take the shot until after the shooter got off his shots. Now the Secret Service, who is led by the former female head of Joe Biden's security detail at this point, basically is blaming local law enforcement for not doing the job exclusively assigned to the Secret Service. The putative assassin checks all the boxes for what we have endlessly been told is the profile of a lone assassin. We've been brainwashed to believe this kind of stuff. A bullied nerd kid with no friends, no apparent social media record, and 2 social worker certified parents. So all of this signals to other potential assassins that they can have a free hand here. That's what I'd like to emphasize. All of this were signaling the protection around Donald Trump is incompetent. You can't discount in this scenario the impact of the administration deep state propaganda about Donald Trump on those who have been assigned to protect him. After all, aren't you the hero if you didn't protect the Nazi? Now, to think about the magnitude of Saturday's event, think about it if it had gone south, if the hand of God had not caused Donald Trump to turn his head at the critical moment. President Trump recognizes that he is the recipient of God's grace. He has remarked repeatedly in interviews that he is supposed to be dead. He has taken the mantle of bringing this nation together, ending foreign wars, and producing prosperity for ourselves and our posterity. He has a chance to recreate the culture of fearless exploitation of scientific and technological frontiers, of adventure, of new discoveries, of constant progress, which is our heritage and is the American culture in reality, not the debased culture in the dark age in which we live and what we have become. Lincoln brought together and revived both the American system of political economy and, in some respects, the culture of our founders, of the Latin farmers, the place where optimism and big things were made to happen. That, in turn, as a mission now, will reverse the hateful pessimism which has collapsed our population, producing negative birth rates and created endless deaths now of pure despair. Vance means that the torch is being held and then passed to a new generation. If that miracle had not happened, all of the people who have called publicly for Trump's assassination, and that includes many in official Washington, including the dean of the so-called foreign policy establishment, Robert Kagan, Vicki Nuland's husband, would have had their wish, but there would be blood on their hands, recognizably so, across more than half of the country. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, the sick Hollywood crowd, the British-controlled foreign policy and military and intelligence crowd, Soros, and all the other imperial bagmen, all of whom have sought to take this man out through impeachment, a coup, bogus criminal prosecutions, and creating the atmosphere for now this. They would face, if that had gone forward, very uncertain futures. But would the population have folded, or would the British have gotten their list and a form of civil war taken care of us once and for all? The Jacobin servants of the British financial empire, Obama, Clinton, Biden, those who endlessly painted Trump as the new Hitler, who begged the Thomas Matthew Crooks of this world to come forward and take their place as heroes in human history, those nondescript bullied nerds like Crook is said to be. They would undoubtedly express condolences to the Trump family for all the hurt they have caused, completely oblivious to the damage they have done to our republic, and then triumph in their own utopian world, divorced from the reality of the day-to-day lives of most of us. They would proceed to implement the fascist Green New Deal and the final destruction of this nation. Under their plan, we would devolve into small city-states. There would be no big government, and we would become an economic zone simply in the world empire, a footnote of yet another society which died from causes which may or may not be found or explored by future historians. That is, if people simply let it go, remaining disorganized, not stepping up, or stupidly taking the debate and engaging in violence against a superior force, which, as Biden says, has the F-16s. Unique individuals make human history. They make breakthroughs which result in progress. They are the geniuses who can chart a new course. Donald Trump is one of those unique people, irreplaceable. We have had others, Franklin, Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Kennedy, in the last year of his life. Political movements do not often survive the deaths of such a leader. Think about the death of the civil rights movement after Martin was killed. Those complicit in trying to destroy this nation know this. That is why they assassinate our geniuses. That is why, for example, they imprisoned Lyndon LaRouche. And they have a kind of class hatred, like a feral animal, against the superior creative human being. So Donald Trump knows that he confronted evil and he was saved by God's grace. He was determined that those who might come after him would have the same willingness to sacrifice themselves in the fight to save this country. That's what's involved in the famous picture of him pumping his fist and saying, fight, fight, fight. He's begging us, and the situation begs us, to find the same type of genius in ourselves, to cultivate that, and to make this movement one which will survive any awful moment which is going to be thrown at us. And it will be thrown at us, because this is really a fight to the death about this republic. So now we must go forward, having gone through this test of fire. And with Donald Trump as our leader, an example of courage, knowledge, and skill, and we must fight the Anglo-Dutch Empire and defeat it once and for all. A republic is a tough thing to have and to keep, because it depends on the citizenry being intelligent and locating that human quality in themselves, which is their own creative genius. Biden is still struggling as to whether he will be the Democratic nominee. It would seem so. However, we're told that Nancy Pelosi is now relentlessly working the phones. That's their problem, not ours. They're retreating now because they realized the stakes, and they lost it in the moment when Trump miraculously turned his head. He's been on TV, Biden, in national press conferences 3 times, calling for an end to violent rhetoric, echoed by his media friends, as if that is the issue. He doesn't apologize for the mass brainwashing which these people have undertaken ever since 2015. They walk a tightrope with a base that is now brainwashed and inflamed, and will not easily come to terms with anything which smacks of appeasing Hitler. The danger around Donald Trump thus becomes even more dangerous now, because the visible enemy seems to be retreating and counseling peace. Don't be stupid. This is not a fight about words or temperature, although that is a symptom of the problem. Recognize that there is a military intelligence propaganda machine which has been working on engineering popular feeling states as the primary mode of warfare for some time now. This cognitive warfare, as it's called, is designed not just to influence you, it's designed to determine your actions, to cause people to act in a certain way. It really became systematically organized under Obama. The talking heads are all a part of this machinery. And what we saw about the assassination boils down to what we know now as to what we have said. The machine orchestrated a campaign against Donald Trump, and they, at the same time, denied him the protection he needed to defeat even the simplest attempt. God intervened because both Trump and America have now the gift of grace to defeat them and to return this nation to its founder's pursuit of the good as the meaning of all of our lives. We're the authors, Bob and I, of the pamphlet about how the British have killed our presidents repeatedly. The Anglo-Dutch Empire does that to people who threaten them. We are in a security environment now very similar to the one in which Kennedy was killed, where internationally targeted hybrid warfare assassinations are taking place, particularly targeting the opponents of the Ukraine war. Fico, the prime minister of Slovakia, was himself subjected to an assassination attempt which almost killed him. Orban has been subject to repeated assassination attempts. Elon Musk, says he too has been repeatedly threatened with assassination attempts, real ones, over the past period. Supreme Court justices have had the same thing here in the United States. So the air is filled with this type of hybrid warfare, and it's something that the British intelligence agencies, secret British intelligence, have specialized in centuries. That's the rundown right now. We're going to be watching the British most closely, and we're going to be laying the blame really where it belongs, as we have before. Contrast that to Melania Trump. She writes, when I watched that violent bullet strike my husband, Donald, I realized my life and Barron's life were on the brink of devastating change. A monster who recognized my husband as an inhuman political machine attempted to wring out Donald's passion, his laughter, ingenuity, love of music, and inspiration. The core facets of my husband's life, his human side, were buried below the political machine. Donald, the generous and caring man who I have been with through the best of times and the worst of times. She said her heart broke for the firefighter killed by the assassin's bullet, protecting his family, and the two other rally goers who were seriously injured. She asked us to locate the human in ourselves, the agapic love which causes us to help others, to go forth together in this miraculous journey called life here on earth, to come together as a nation. Her letter was a piece of poetry. As Shelley once told us, poets like this are the hidden legislators of the world. It will have a most profound effect. So I'll open it up right now for further discussion with my comrades, starting with Bob.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm going to follow up what Barbara just said in a certain kind of way. Hold on. I hope the sound's okay. Just a little bit. Yeah. The I mean, one of the things we're hearing right now, coming out of some of the hypocritical and nasty, opponents of Donald Trump. There was a piece today in the New York Times, and there's been other pronouncements of this type, saying that we have to tone down the rhetoric. We have to tone down the rhetoric. It's becoming too violent. And of course, the people who are saying this are, in almost every instance, the same people who over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, have been increasingly demonizing Trump, persecuting Trump, imprisoning members of the MAGA movement, creating exactly this atmosphere, pre-assassination atmosphere that we're in right now. And now all of a sudden they're saying we need to tone down the rhetoric. Now, clearly we're at war, and we're at war with the British Empire, what people call the deep state, the intelligence community apparatus, what many of the things Barbara was just mentioning. But what I'm going to do here is try to provoke people a little bit on the kind of thinking that's really required, not just thinking, the kind of emotional, and one might even say spiritual state that really we should all strive to operate from in the days ahead, because part of this thing of creating this atmosphere is to whip up tensions, hatred, on all sides, and what I'm going to do here is to read to you, and I'm going to be looking down a lot because I'm going to be reading read to you quotes from several individuals in the past on which I think really define the way we need to think through our own sense of who we are and how we should be approaching this situation. Now, the first quote, and these are excerpts. I'm not reading any long speeches. The first excerpt I'm going to read is from George Washington's farewell address, which he was released on September 17th, 1796. And it goes as follows. Friends and fellow citizens, I shall carry it with me to my grave as a strong incitement to unceasing vows that heaven may continue to you the choicest tokens of its beneficence, that your union and brotherly affection may be perpetual, that the free Constitution, which is the work of your hands, may be sacredly maintained, that its administration in every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue, that, in fine, the happiness of the people of these states, under the auspices of liberty, may be made complete by so careful a preservation and so prudent a use of this blessing as will acquire to them the glory of recommending it to the applause, the affection, and the adoption of every nation which is yet a stranger to it. I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its roots in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness, and it is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turn this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation or the ruins of our public liberty. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. It kindles the animosity of one part against another. It foments occasionally riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption which find a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passion. Thus, the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another. And offering to you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend, I dare not hope they will make the strong and lasting impression I could wish. But if I may even flatter myself that they may be productive of some partial benefit, some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. This hope will be a full recompense for the solicitude for your welfare by which they have been dictated. So that's from George Washington. Now I'm going to read 3 short excerpts, and obviously they're things that people are familiar with. A lot of people on this call have probably read these or maybe even know them almost by heart. But I'm going to read you 3 short excerpts from Abraham Lincoln. The first is from his first inaugural address, March of 1861. Very short excerpts. And in the first one, he says, I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. So that's from the first inaugural. And then from the second inaugural, 4 years later, in March of 1865, Lincoln said the following. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. All right, and the third excerpt is a short portion from the Gettysburg Address. Again, many people know this by heart. November 19th, 1863. We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Now, the last thing I want to read you an excerpt from, and again, I probably within the last 24 hours, almost everyone on this call has read this, but I'm going to read you some excerpts different from what Barbara read from the message that was released yesterday by Mrs. Trump, Melania Trump. And then I'm going to have just a few closing remarks on why I read what I've read. And this is what Mrs. Trump has to say. I am thinking of you now, my fellow Americans. We have always been a unique nation. America, the fabric of our gentle nation, is tattered, but our courage and common sense must ascend and bring us back together as one. To the families of the innocent victims who are now suffering from this heinous act, I humbly offer my sincerest sympathy. Your need to summon your inner strength for such a terrible reason saddens me. Let us not forget that differing opinions, policy, and political games are inferior to love. Our personal, structural, and life commitment until death is at serious risk. Political concepts are simple when compared to us, human beings. We are all humans, and fundamentally, instinctively, we want to help one another. American politics are only one vehicle that can uplift our communities. Love, compassion, kindness, and empathy are necessities. And let us remember that when the time comes to look beyond the left and the right, beyond the red and the blue, we all come from families with the passion to fight for a better life together while we are here in this earthly realm. Dawn is here again. Let us reunite now. This morning, ascend above the hate, the vitriol, and the simple-minded ideas that ignite violence. We all want a world where respect is paramount, family is first, and love transcends. We can realize this world again. Each of us must demand to get it back. We must insist that respect fills the cornerstone of our relationships again. I am thinking of you, my fellow Americans. So that's all I'm going to read to you. And, I would ask people as we continue this discussion with what Bruce has to say and with the dialogue and the discussion that follows it, that some of these ideas resonate in your heart and mind. Because often, we are sort of pushed and pressured, into the realm of practical politics. And there are legitimate reasons for that. We have to win this election. But we are at a moment, an extraordinary moment, an historic moment now. You can see it. You can feel it. It's tangible. It's in the air where a great change is now possible. I mean, and you think back to Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, you know, or even his second inaugural address, 4 years after the beginning of the war. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the Civil War. Hundreds of thousands. Unbelievable suffering. And what does Lincoln say? He says we have to bind up the nation's wounds. What do all three of these people say? Washington, Lincoln, Melania Trump. We have to get beyond the vitriol and the hatred. Look, there's a lot of discussion right now about how, Trump is making inroads into the trade union movement. He's making inroads into the Hispanic vote, into the Black vote, all of which is true, and all of which is very, very good. But too often, people look at this sort of like a mathematical calculation. If he gets so many votes among Blacks or Hispanics or Blacks or some other constituency, if some of the women come back to vote for him, then this is going to, mathematically add up to a majority in the election. That is not the way to think about the situation we're in right now. Because why is it that a lot of these, traditional Democratic layers are now turning to Trump? Why is that going on? And there's multifaceted reasons, cultural, economic, and what have you. But it is because people recognize that this campaign, like Lincoln's campaign in 1860, because there's nothing else like it in American history except for the 1860 election, this campaign is the hope to save this nation, to bring us back together as a people. We may have differences. We may not agree on everything, but we have a sense, as Melania touches upon, we have a sense of what America is supposed to be, what our nation really is supposed to be all about, and what it should stand for. And that is what is at stake in this election. And I believe, we should not, except for the 10% lunatics or 15% of the population who are Trump-hating, deranged lunatics, except for them, I think, what is required here is open arms towards all of Americans. Because really, people do want a future, and they do want to save this republic. And this campaign, at this moment, more and more people are beginning to recognize that this is the rallying point to do just that. And that's why I read to you these quotes from Washington, who sensed the danger of factionalism, from Lincoln, who wanted to bind up the nation's wounds, and from Melania and her beautiful message. So that's what I wanted to contribute to this discussion.
So I can thank Barbara and Bob, first of all, for their very passionate and inspiring remarks, which are totally encapsulate this situation. What I can add is this: it's a principle of physical science that the domain of sense perception is not the domain of physical reality. This is often ignored by reductionist science. I'm speaking of anything from Newton to modern Copenhagen theory of quantum mechanics, which seeks to only create mathematical relationships among things that we see. But real science, the science which actually advances human knowledge, has always been based on being able to discover a principle that is beyond the domain of sense perception. And this is exemplified by Kepler's discovery of the principle of gravitation, or Leibniz's discovery of the principle of potential. And I could go on. Or Einstein's discovery of the theory of relativity. So that's a principle of physical science. It also extends into biological sciences. You cannot understand or describe living processes by the behavior of the matter that resides in a living organism. There's a higher principle of life which actually organizes the matter. Life does not arise from the matter. The matter is organized by the principle of life. And this is true also in the case of mankind. It is not the physical and biological characteristics of a human being which characterize a human being. It's the quality of thinking, the ability of creativity, which is really powered by the emotion of love and agape that Washington, Lincoln, Melania, Barbara, and Bob all spoke of. And Lyndon LaRouche told us that this is also a principle of politics and economics, that politics and economics is not determined at all by what you see. These are like the shadows on Plato's caves, the polls, the pundits, the policy initiatives. These are like the shadows on the cave. What governs real politics is the characteristics of the society and the people who are striving to define a future, to define their present as a function of their future. Now, in times of great crisis, like the ones Bob referred to, and the one we're living through now, this becomes even more true. And if you look at the events, not just over this last weekend, but over the last, I would say the last 4 years, or you can go back further, you can always look at this. You see an unfolding, a transformation going on in the spirit of the country and the spirit of the people who are now becoming changed as a result of this. LaRouche taught us to look at the great tragedians like Shakespeare or Schiller, who presented in all their plays, their tragedies, their comedies, their history plays, on the stage, how the behavior of the actors, the unfolding of events in a great play is guided not by the push and pull of the plot, but the push and pull of the plot and the development of the characters is a function of something much higher. In the case of a play, it's an artificial creation by a creative playwright. In the case of real history, it's a much higher principle. And that's what we are seeing unfold, and which is gripping us, which is becoming, of which we are becoming a vehicle for. And this is true for every one of us as well as for President Trump. You know, when you hear him talk about what he did in that moment, where he survived the assassination attempt, and he made he knew he had to raise that fist in the air, not to show something about himself, but to create something in the thousands of people there and the millions who have since watched that throughout the world, that were guided by a higher principle, by a spirit of survival and a spirit of accomplishment and a spirit of overcoming tragedy. That the United States is not going to end in a tragedy, but it will continue and continue to define the future. And that spirit is loose and active in our country and in the world today in a way that we cannot even comprehend, but we know is there. And in the knowledge that knowing that it's there, we can rise to do what's necessary to fulfill that mission for ourselves. Barbara mentioned Percy Shelley's Defense of Poetry, which is something that Lyndon LaRouche cited many, many times to understand what happens in a period of to mankind, to society in a period of crisis like this. And Shelley is describing the poet, and he talks about this higher principle. And he says that even the poet doesn't really know what he has become an instrument of. But he is nevertheless touched by that higher principle, that higher power, and is able to enunciate concepts that are profound concepts about man and nature, and society as a whole becomes capable of receiving and imparting higher conceptions about man and nature than they can in ordinary times. I think that's clearly what we're seeing right now. And the events of the weekend represent kind of turning point, but not a shift. It represents what we might call in Riemannian physics a shift into a new manifold. And that manifold is the one that's going to rededicate this country to what it says in our Constitution, that the purpose of our country is to secure the blessings of liberty to our future, to our posterity. And I would hope that we keep that in mind and discuss that among ourselves right now.
Okay, thank you, all of you. I'm going to open it up for discussion with everyone here. And before I do, I just want to show this once again. And I mean, you just contrast the resiliency of President Trump, the words that he mouthed after this tragic attempted assassination against his life was fight, 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 as Barbara said, as many people recognized here. But he didn't let that deter him. I mean, from the standpoint that President Trump said, I can't change my schedule. There was a reason that God kept him here. And he is now at the Republican National Convention as we speak. And he has also just, excuse me, announced his nominee for vice president. And so I wanted to stop that there. Also say, and maybe get your response on, Barbara, I know that you read, speaking of the nominee and the new, that has been approved, J.D. Vance. I believe that you mentioned one time that you read J.D. Vance's book. Is that correct?
That's true. It's well worth reading for people. You know, part of the reason why Donald said he picked him is because of the life he lived and is part of, and he's never forgotten where he comes from. And he comes from those forgotten men and women of this country, you know, displaced by the events post 1971, where we stopped having any pathway for a certain class of people to do anything except line up for this crazy economy, which has no real meaning for anybody's lives. So it's called Hillbilly Elegy, appropriately, and it's well worth reading for people to give you a real sense of the man and the sense that he has of loving the American people, all of them, not the elites, although he definitely has that experience. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School, after all, or Yale. I can't remember which one of the two.
Yeah.
And you know, basically, he got the education which allowed him to, you know, become something of a celebrity. He is an ex-Democrat. Some of us have trod that path in our lives. And recognize how it is that we can bring these people really back into the fold of rationality at this point and away from the type of insane faction which Bob and George Washington were actually talking about. So all in all, it's a good choice. It's a choice where, you know, it's somebody who has lived the life of a lot of people and knows intimately what it is to suffer when you don't have any damn money and the rent's too high, and you know what happens in life when you have kids, trying to raise them under that circumstance, and how you actually discipline yourself to bring about a good result in all of that. So it could not be a better passing of the torch, so to say, as opposed to the crazy woman on the other side, who does nothing but giggle and evidence the fact that she's token up at every opportunity. So I think it's a wonderful contrast.
Good. And they did make a Netflix movie film based on the book that people can look at. But I know people have questions. For if you're on the call, you have a question, if you are comment, you want to raise your hand by pressing *9 on the phone line and *6 when I call on you to unmute yourself. And then we will just tell us your first name and where you're calling from. Otherwise, you can use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen. And I will say that I understand shortly here, maybe a little bit before the call ends here, at the RNC convention, you're going to have an announcement made, a report from the platform committee on the adoption of the Republican Party platform that takes up President Trump's platform. And maybe you guys want to comment on the importance of that platform against all of the noise as we've exposed around why the Project 2025 platform is not Trump's platform, and he's made that very clear. So, but we can get into that. I'm going to go ahead and take some of the callers here.